I still don't understand what possessed the Exchequer to bring you in on this investigation. We've got it all under control.
As always, I'm sure you do. So, Inspector, what happened, as you see it?
Typical breaking and entering. Entry was made through an upstairs bedroom window, which was forced open. Then, thinking that the house was empty, the intruder made his way downstairs. He opened the study door and came face to face with Mr. Mason. A fight ensued, which resulted in Mason's death, and the murderer fled through the study window.
Was anything taken?
Nothing. The jewelry and heirlooms all accounted for.
What about the government papers Mason was working on that night?
We sent them to the Treasury. They're all accounted for as well.
Well, I'm curious to know your theory as to a motive for the crime, Inspector.
Motive? Well, we haven't quite got there yet, but I'll let you know just as soon as we discover it. I still don't understand what possessed the Exchequer to bring you in on. I still don't understand what possessed the Exchequer to bring you in on this investigation.
Excuse me, Mr. Murray.
Ah, Whitson, what can I do for you?
It's Watson, sir.
I don't believe I've ever worked on a case by the name of Watson.
No, I mean the name... Never mind. Well, then what about the Mason murder?
Mason, I know. It looks like he was killed by David.
David? You mean you know the murderer?
No, not the murderer. The murder weapon. This is David. It's a copy of a very early Michelangelo. You can see the blood stains here. I believe this was one of two statues on the fireplace mantel. Apparently, the intruder grabbed this one and killed Mason in the struggle. It's a handsome piece, isn't it?
Excuse me, Mr. Murray. Excuse me.
What do you know of the Mason case, Ellis?
Oh, the accountant chap, right. And some of the fellows in the office here were gabbing about some work he was doing for the government.
Did they believe it was related to his death?
Not at all. Evidently, he wasn't working on anything worth killing him over. It was only some paperwork that any other accountant could do if Mason died.
They called themselves the Three Musketeers. Johnny Small, Leroy Eakin, and Nat Cook. We used to think of them as petty criminals. No one took them seriously until a few major robberies 3 or 4 years ago. They were among the prime suspects, but there was insufficient evidence for a conviction or even an arrest. Then Cook was caught in a jewel heist, and the gang broke up.
What of the others?
I haven't seen either one of them since.
Speaking of mysteries, what are you and Holmes working on?
The murder of Oswald Mason.
Don't know a thing about it. Let me know if I should look into it.
Will do, Quinn.
Venus de Milo is probably the most admired of all surviving sculptural works of antiquity. Oh, I heartily agree.
Read on.
Of course. Experts generally agree it is a Greek marble from the 4th or 5th century BC. Found on the island of Milos in 1820, it was taken by the French ambassador to Constantinople and eventually presented to the Louvre by Louis XVIII. It remains there to this day. Oh, it would be a thrill to see it, wouldn't it, Holmes?
Perhaps.
Well, look who's here. The only doctor in London who may know more about murder than I. Who is it this time, Watson?
Mr. Oswald Mason.
Did in this morning, right after my first cup of tea. His body arrived at the hospital at midnight, 11 April. He was in his early 40s and in very good health. Or should I say in very good health, but also very dead.
An unfortunate combination, to be sure.
I've always thought so. The fellow's death was caused by a blow to the side of his head by a heavy blunt object, and under his fingernails I discovered blood of a different type than his own. Looks like he put up a fight. Nothing very exciting or informative, I'm afraid.
Here's the file you requested. Once again, you've beaten Scotland Yard to the punch. I haven't seen them around here for weeks.
Jonathan Small, convicted of selling stolen goods in 1880, served 6-month prison term. Cited on public drunkenness and disturbing the peace in 1885, 1886, and twice in 1882. Suspect in Drummond Bank robbery, 1886, along with Leroy Eakin, not brought to trial. Suspect in a diamond robbery in 1887 along with Nat Cook. Not enough evidence to bring Small to trial. Cook was convicted of the crime and is awaiting release from Millbank Prison.
Oswald and Rose Mason were, how do I put it delicately, the most boring couple in London. Mrs. Mason was a thoroughly mediocre whist player, and Oswald rarely showed his face at social functions. In that regard, we should count ourselves fortunate. He was a dismal conversationalist and laughed at all the wrong jokes. I can't imagine the man inspiring anyone to murder.
Oh, Holmes, my man, how's the world treating you?
Just fine, Porky, just fine, but it hasn't treated a man named Oswald Mason at all well. He was murdered last night. Have you heard anything about it?
Not a whisper. Must not have involved any of the chaps what hang about here.
The clerk says if we're to find anything out about the Bacon and Company audit, we must speak to Sir Adrian Malmquist at the Treasury.
Well, let's not tarry, Watson.
Excuse me, madam. We're investigating the murder of Oswald Mason, and we understand your company may be involved in an audit that...
Stop right there. You may save your breath. Our solicitors have advised us not to speak to anyone regarding this audit matter, so mum's the word.
But I merely wanted to know...
I said you can save your breath, sir.
I just can't imagine why anyone would want to do such a thing. Oswald Mason was so well liked by all of his fellow workers here at the bank.
How long was he employed here, Mr. Kimball?
More than 15 years. He'd always been one of our most trusted employees.
What do you know about his work with the Treasury?
Very little. One of our responsibilities is to oversee government audits. This was Oswald's area of responsibility. This work is highly confidential. I only know that he was working for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You'll have to talk to the Governor, Lionel Foxcroft, if you have questions about this. I'm sorry, that's all I know.
May we examine his office?
I suppose that would be acceptable. I am planning to have his secretary, Mrs. Mabel Brown, sort through his papers, but under the circumstances, I gave her the day off.
Here's Mr. Mason's bank statement. It appears that on April 4th he drew a personal cheque for £240.
Look, Holmes, passages for 2 to Greece from Aberdeen Navigation, purchased the 28th of March. Oh, and here's another receipt from Evanson and Company gift shop for 2 statues, dated the 31st.
Here's a bill from the Langham Hotel for £3.06.
What do you suppose we're to make of all of this, Holmes?
I'm not yet sure, Watson.
How can I help you, gentlemen?
We understand you were informed of Mr. Mason's death.
Yes. Mr. Kimball gave me the bad news this morning.
Can you think of any reason why anyone would want to murder Mr. Mason?
Oh, no. He was such a nice man. He was tremendously well liked by everyone at work. And he and Mrs. Mason have been so very kind to me ever since my husband died at sea 3 years ago. Why, they've almost been like a family to me. Last week for my birthday, they gave me a lovely little statue. Oh.
There, Mrs. Brown.
I'm sorry. I was just thinking about when I came home from work late last night. My little birthday statue had fallen onto the floor and was broken into bits. It was almost as if it was an omen.
Perhaps we should go, Holmes.
Good thinking, Watson.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. It's just that this is all so very difficult.
You told us quite enough, Mrs. Brown. We'll just show ourselves out.
Stiff upper lip.
Slow as me sister last night. Didn't pick up anyone matching that description, Governor. Did pick up a fancy-looking lady, had a famous look about her.
Oh, and who was she?
Not sure where I'd seen her before. She was off to a party of some sort. Dainty young thing, and a fine tipper too.
I will never forget that dreadful day. Well, it only took 15 minutes and the diamonds were gone. We still haven't recovered from the loss.
Weren't you insured?
Oh, yes, of course, but no amount of money can replace the loss of these particular gems. I mean, each one possessed a soul of its own. They were a masterpiece of nature. When those 3 men took them, I am quite certain they didn't know that they were stealing a piece of my soul as well.
How terribly sad. You mentioned 3 men, Mrs. Nibbs. Who other than Cook was involved?
Oh, if I only knew. You see, they were wearing masks at the time, so I couldn't tell. But I don't miss a thing, Dr. Watson. I was able to identify Cook because he removed his mask as he exited the shop. Oh, there were other suspects. Friends of Cook, but no one was ever found. And as long as Cook remains mum, the others remain free.